William pressed his body against the wall as three masked men circled Isabella's house. Through the window, he saw 8-year-old Amelia playing with her toys, completely unaware, while Henry was 3 states away on the road. The lead attacker kicked in the door, and Isabella screamed. William's heart hammered as he grabbed a rusted pipe from the alley and charged through the splintered doorway, his voice cracking as he yelled, "Let her go!" At the masked man whose hand was already wrapped around Amelia's tiny wrist. The attacker turned, and beneath the mask, William saw something that made his blood freeze. "If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please like and subscribe to Hell's Angels Tales, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent." Enjoy the story. William's breath fogged in the freezing Denver air as he crouched behind the rusted dumpster, watching 3 masked men circle Isabella's apartment like wolves stalking wounded prey. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in late November, and the alley behind the modest brick building on Colfax Avenue was dead silent, except for the crunch of boots on gravel and the distant hum of traffic from the interstate. Through the ground floor window glowing with warm yellow light, he could see 8-year-old Amelia sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, completely absorbed in building a tower with her colorful blocks, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she hummed a tune William recognized from the Disney movie she'd watched earlier that week. Isabella was in the kitchen washing dishes, her back turned to the front door, completely unaware that 3 armed men were now positioned around her home like a military strike team. Henry was 3 states away in Albuquerque on a club run, and these men knew it. They'd been watching, waiting. William's heart slammed against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack through bone as the lead attacker, a massive figure in black tactical gear with shoulders like a linebacker, tested the doorknob with gloved hands, found it locked, then stepped back and nodded to his partners with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The 14-year-old's hands trembled as he pressed himself against the cold metal dumpster, his threadbare jacket doing nothing to stop the icy wind from cutting through to his skin. His mind screamed at him to run, to disappear into the night like he'd done 100 times before when trouble found him on the streets of Phoenix, in the foster homes that never wanted him, in every place that reminded him he was alone in a world that didn't care if he lived or died. But then Amelia laughed, that pure, innocent sound cutting through the darkness like a bell, and something inside William's chest cracked open. He'd been sleeping on Isabella's porch for 3 weeks after she'd caught him digging through her trash at 2 in the morning, desperate for anything edible, and instead of calling the cops like everyone else did, she'd opened her door and handed him a plate of warm pasta with garlic bread and told him he could sleep on the porch if he needed shelter from the cold. She'd looked at him like he mattered, like he wasn't just another invisible homeless kid the world had thrown away like garbage. She'd asked his name, remembered it, smiled when she saw him. The lead attacker raised his boot, military-grade combat boots, William noticed, the kind that could crush bone, and kicked the door with devastating force. The frames splintered like matchsticks, wood exploding inward with a crack that echoed through the alley, and Isabella's scream pierced the night air. William's body moved before his brain could catch up, his hand closing around a rusted metal pipe lying beside the dumpster, the cold steel heavy and solid in his grip. He sprinted toward the broken doorway, his worn sneakers pounding the wet pavement, adrenaline flooding his system like liquid fire and drowning out the voice in his head that told him he was a scrawny 14-year-old kid running toward 3 grown men who would kill him without a second thought. Inside the apartment, chaos had erupted in the span of heartbeats. The lead attacker had Isabella pinned against the kitchen counter, one gloved hand clamped over her mouth to muffle her screams, while the other pressed something cold and metal against her ribs that William realized with horror was a gun. The second man, lean and quick like a predator, stalked toward Amelia, who stood frozen in the center of the room, her tower of blocks collapsed around her feet, her brown eyes wide with the kind of terror no 8-year-old should ever know. The third attacker was ransacking the living room with methodical violence, throwing cushions off the couch, ripping through drawers, scattering papers and photographs across the floor like he was searching for something specific. "Where is it?" The lead attacker snarled at Isabella, his voice distorted and mechanical through the black ski mask that covered everything except his eyes. Cold blue eyes that held no mercy. "Where'd Henry hide the ledger?" "Don't make me ask twice." William charged through the splintered door, with chips crunching under his feet, and swung the pipe with everything he had, every ounce of fear and rage and desperation channeled into that single motion. The pipe connected with the second attacker's shoulders just as his hand reached for Amelia's arm, and the impact sent a jarring vibration up William's arms that rattled his teeth. The man roared in pain and spun around, his eyes widening behind the mask when he saw the scrawny teenager with blood-matted hair gripping the pipe like a baseball bat, his chest heaving, his stance defiant despite the tremor in his legs. "Get away from her." William's voice cracked, betraying his 14 years and the terror coursing through his veins. But his stance didn't waver even as his knees threatened to buckle. The attacker he'd hit lunged at him with a growl that sounded more animal than human, and William swung again, this time aiming low and connecting with the man's knee with a sickening crunch that made William's stomach turn. The attacker went down hard, clutching his leg and cursing in words that burned William's ears. But William didn't have time to process what he'd done because the third attacker was rushing him from the side, abandoning his search to eliminate the threat. The impact drove William into the wall with bone-rattling force, stars exploding across his vision as his head cracked against the plaster hard enough to leave a dent. The pipe clattered to the floor, spinning away across the hardwood. A fist slammed into William's ribs, then another, and he tasted copper as blood filled his mouth and ran down his chin. Through the ringing in his ears that sounded like church bells, he heard Isabella screaming his name and Amelia sobbing and hiccuping gasps, and that sound, that broken, terrified sound from the little girl who'd shared her cookies with him last Saturday, gave him strength he didn't know his battered body possessed. William's hand shot out and grabbed a glass vase from the side table, his fingers closing around it just as another punch aimed for his face. He swung the vase with wild desperation and smashed it across his attacker's mask, sending the man stumbling backward with a howl as glass shards embedded in the fabric and blood began seeping through. Subscribe now and comment where you're watching from. This story gets darker. The lead attacker released Isabella with a shove that sent her stumbling against the refrigerator, and he pulled something from his tactical belt. A combat knife with a 7-inch blade that gleamed under the apartment's fluorescent lights like a sliver of death itself. "You just made a big mistake, kid," he growled, his voice dropping to something cold and final as he advanced on William with the predatory patience of someone who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. William's back hit the wall, his ribs screaming in agony with every breath, his vision blurring from the head wound that was now bleeding down his temple and into his left eye. He had no weapon, no training, no chance against a man twice his size and 3 times his weight wielding a blade designed to kill efficiently. His legs shook. His hands were slick with blood, his own or someone else's, he couldn't tell anymore. But between him and that knife stood Amelia, still frozen in the center of the room like a statue, her tear-streaked face a portrait of pure terror, her small hands clutched to her chest. William thought about his mother, dead from an overdose when he was 11. He thought about his younger brother, lost somewhere in the foster system. He thought about all the times he'd run, all the times he'd hidden, all the times he'd chosen survival over everything else because that's what the streets taught you. Look out for yourself because no one else will. But Isabella had looked out for him. She'd given him pasta. She'd smiled at him. She'd made him feel human again. William pushed off the wall, his legs threatening to give out, and charged one more time. He went low, ignoring the knife, ignoring the impossibility of what he was doing, and tackled the attacker around the waist with the desperation of someone who'd already accepted death. They crashed into the coffee table, glass shattering beneath them in an explosion of sharp fragments that bit into William's back. The knife slashed across William's forearm, a line of fire that opened his skin like paper and made him scream, but he didn't let go. He clawed at the mask, bit down on the man's wrist when it came near his face, fought with the desperate savagery of a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. Isabella grabbed her phone from the counter with shaking hands and dialed 911, her voice breaking as she shouted their address to the dispatcher. The third attacker, still nursing his injured knee and the glass embedded in his mask, grabbed her wrist and yanked the phone away. But Isabella had spent years married to a biker. She knew how to fight. She drove her elbow into his throat with precision, and he went down gasping and choking. She scooped up Amelia and ran for the bathroom, slamming the door and dragging the heavy cabinet in front of it, while Amelia buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone else in the building must have called the cops when they heard the screaming. The lead attacker heard them too, and he threw William off with brutal force, sending the teenager sliding across the blood-slicked floor until he crashed into the overturned couch. William's vision went white with pain. "We're done here," the lead attacker snapped to his partners, his voice sharp with frustration. "Move out. Now." But before they fled through the shattered door into the November darkness, the lead attacker pulled a spray paint can from his tactical vest and shook it with deliberate slowness. He turned to the wall and wrote across Isabella's living room in dripping crimson letters that ran like blood. "Tell Henry we're coming for what he owes." The three men disappeared into the alley, their boots echoing off the brick walls as red and blue lights flooded the street outside and tires screeched to a halt. William lay on the floor among the broken glass and scattered blocks, his arm bleeding through his jacket, his ribs possibly broken, his head pounding like someone was driving nails into his skull. Isabella emerged from the bathroom with Amelia clutched to her chest and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his wounds like she was afraid touching him would break him further. "Why?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto his shirt. "William, why would you do that? You could have died." William tried to smile, but winced instead, every muscle in his face protesting. "You gave me pasta," he said simply, his voice barely above a whisper, and then the world tilted sideways as shock finally claimed him and everything went dark. The paramedics arrived 4 minutes later, their boots crunching through the debris as they assessed the scene with professional efficiency. They loaded William onto a stretcher, started in 4, pressed an oxygen mask over his face. Isabella rode in the ambulance with him, holding his uninjured hand while Amelia sat on her lap, the little girl's fingers wrapped tight around William's thumb like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. At Denver General Hospital's emergency room, a doctor with kind eyes and steady hands stitched William's forearm with quick, efficient movements while a nurse cleaned the head wound and checked his pupils for signs of concussion. 2 police officers stood in the doorway taking Isabella's statement, their expressions grim as she described the attackers, the message on the wall, the cryptic demand about something Henry supposedly owed. One officer, a veteran detective named Carson with gray temples and weary eyes that had seen too much violence, stepped away to make a phone call. When he returned 20 minutes later, his face was tight with concern. He pulled Isabella aside into the hallway, leaving William with the nurses who were now wrapping his ribs. Through the partially open door, William watched Detective Carson show Isabella something on his phone. A photograph that made all the color drain from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her knees buckled, and Carson caught her elbow to steady her. "Are you certain?" Isabella's voice was barely a whisper, but in the quiet hospital corridor at midnight, William heard every word. Her next sentence made his blood run cold despite the warm blankets the nurses had wrapped around him. "That's Henry's sergeant-at-arms. That's Marcus." The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. William lay propped against sterile white pillows, his bandaged arm throbbing with every heartbeat, while Isabella sat in the chair beside his bed with Amelia curled in her lap. The little girl had finally stopped crying, but her fingers remained locked around her mother's shirt like a lifeline. The clock on the wall read 1:23 a.m., and through the 4th-floor window, Denver stretched out in a grid of lights that looked deceptively peaceful. Through the door's small window, William could see Detective Carson pacing the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression darker than the November sky outside. Every few seconds, another police officer or hospital administrator would stop him, speaking in hushed, urgent tones that William couldn't hear but could feel in his bones. Isabella hadn't spoken since they'd brought her back from the hallway 10 minutes ago. Her face was chalk white, her hands trembling as she stroked Amelia's hair with mechanical movements that seemed more habit than comfort. The photograph Detective Carson had shown her might as well have been a death sentence based on the way all life had drained from her features. William's ribs ached with every breath, wrapped tight in bandages that restricted his movement. The stitches in his forearm pulled when he shifted position, a constant reminder of how close that knife had come to severing something vital. His head wound throbbed beneath the gauze, and the doctor had warned him about potential concussion symptoms. But physical pain was nothing compared to the dread settling in his stomach as he watched Isabella's silent breakdown. "Isabella," William said quietly, his voice rough from screaming during the fight. "Who's Marcus?" She flinched like he'd struck her. For a long moment, she didn't answer, just stared at the wall where a faded painting of Colorado mountains hung in a cheap frame. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible, like she was afraid the walls themselves might be listening. "Henry's best friend. His brother. His sergeant-at-arms in the Denver Hells Angels chapter." She paused, swallowing hard enough that William saw her throat work. "They've known each other 15 years. Marcus was there when Henry first prospected for the club. He was best man at our wedding. He held Amelia when she was born. He's her godfather." William's chest tightened despite the bandages. "And he just tried to kill you." "Not just me," Isabella whispered, her eyes filling with tears that spilled down her cheeks and dripped onto Amelia's blonde hair. "All of us. You, Amelia, anyone who stands between him and freedom. Because of what I'm about to do." The full story came out in broken fragments over the next 20 minutes. Like shattered glass, Isabella was trying to piece back together with bleeding hands. William listened, his 14-year-old mind struggling to process the layers of betrayal and violence spiraling around this family who'd shown him the first kindness he'd known in years. 6 months ago, for members of Henry's club, Marcus among them, had gone rogue. They'd been planning it for weeks, maybe months, keeping it secret from Henry and the other chapter leaders. The target was a rival gang's drug shipment coming through Boulder, worth $500,000 on the street. Easy money, a big score. But the intelligence they'd gotten from a corrupt DEA informant was bad. Dead wrong. They'd hit the wrong house on the wrong night. A family of 4. Nathan and Rebecca Torres, and their 2 children, a 6-year-old boy named Felix and a 4-year-old girl named Sophia, had been inside watching a movie when Marcus and 3 other bikers kicked in their door at 2 a.m. The father tried to protect his family. Marcus shot him first, then the mother when she wouldn't stop screaming. The children had been collateral damage, witnesses who couldn't be left alive. For bodies. For coffins. For graves in a Boulder cemetery that Henry had visited in secret, sick with guilt and rage. Henry had found out 3 days after the massacre when Marcus came to him at midnight, drunk on whiskey and drowning in guilt, confessing everything in broken sobs. Marcus had expected sympathy, or at least understanding. Brotherhood above all else. What happens in the club stays in the club. But Henry had 2 children's faces burned into his mind, and he couldn't unsee them. He'd faced an impossible choice: protect his brothers and become complicit in the murder of children, or break the most sacred rule of the Brotherhood. You never, ever turn on your own and send them to prison for life. He'd chosen his conscience over his colors. Henry went to the FBI 2 days later, Isabella said, her voice cracking like thin ice. He gave them everything: names, evidence, locations of the weapons they used, details about how they planned it. But the FBI said anonymous tips weren't enough for murder charges this serious. They needed a witness who could testify in court under oath. Someone who could confirm Henry's information and make the charges stick. You, Williams said. Isabella nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I'd overheard Marcus and the others at our house a week after the killings, sitting in our living room drinking beer like nothing had happened, planning their alibis, getting their story straight. They didn't know I was in the hallway. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone without them knowing. 23 minutes of them laughing about how the cops had no leads, how they'd cleaned the guns, how the Torres family was just collateral damage in the wrong place. Her voice broke completely on those last words, and she pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle a sob. Amelia stirred slightly, but didn't wake. The FBI said my recording, combined with Henry's testimony and the physical evidence, would guarantee convictions. Murder in the first degree. 4 counts each. Life sentences without possibility of parole for all 4 of them. The trial was scheduled to begin in 10 days at the federal courthouse in downtown Denver. Isabella was the prosecution's star witness, the linchpin that would send 4 Hells Angels to prison for the rest of their lives. And Marcus knew it. When the other club members found out Henry had turned on his own brothers, the Denver chapter exploded. Isabella continued, her voice steadier now, like she was relieved to finally share the burden. Half of them, maybe 30 bikers, sided with Marcus. They see Henry as a traitor who violated the code, who chose outsiders over brotherhood. They think Marcus should get a pass because he's one of them. And the other half, William asked, though he could guess, they think Marcus dishonored the club by killing innocent children. They see him as a rabid dog who needs to be put down before he destroys everything the club stands for. The Denver chapter is tearing itself apart. There have been fights. 2 bikers are in the ICU. Someone torched Marcus's garage. Someone else slashed the tires on Henry's truck. And we're caught in the middle of a war we didn't start. William's mind raced, trying to process the layers of betrayal and violence spiraling outward like ripples from a stone thrown into dark water. Does Henry know Marcus came after you tonight? I called him from the ambulance while you were unconscious. He was in Albuquerque on legitimate club business, a regional meeting with chapters from 3 states. He said he'd leave immediately, but that's an 8-hour drive even if he speeds. Isabella checked her phone, her face tightening with fresh worry. He left Albuquerque at midnight. He should have called by now to tell me where he is. He's not answering his phone. A nurse entered to check William's vitals, her movements efficient but gentle. She was young, probably late 20s, with kind eyes that reminded William of a social worker who'd once tried to help him. As she adjusted his 4-drip and made notes on her tablet, William caught her stealing glances at Isabella's tear-stained face and Amelia's sleeping form. You folks doing okay? The nurse asked softly. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? We're fine, Isabella lied. Thank you. The nurse left with a sympathetic smile that said she knew they were anything but fine. Detective Carson finally came into the room, his expression grim, his jaw tight with tension. He closed the door behind him and pulled up a second chair, sitting down heavily like the weight of the world was pressing on his shoulders. Mrs. Isabella, we need to discuss protective custody, he said without preamble, his cop voice firmly in place. I've been on the phone with the U.S. Marshals Service. They have a safe house in Colorado Springs, about an hour south. It's secure, off the grid, monitored 24/7. We can have you there within 2 hours. And William? Isabella asked immediately, her hand reaching across to grip the teenager's uninjured arm with surprising strength. He saved our lives tonight. If Marcus knows he interfered, if he finds out William is the reason they failed. He's not family, ma'am, Carson said, though his tone was apologetic. The safe house is only authorized for witnesses and immediate relatives. Federal protocols. I can arrange for him to go back into the foster system with enhanced security measures, maybe place him in a different city. No, Isabella said flatly, her voice carrying a steel William hadn't heard before. William stays with us, or we stay here. I'm not negotiable on this, detective. Carson's jaw tightened, but something in Isabella's eyes, a fierce maternal protection that extended beyond her own daughter, made him nod slowly. I'll make the arrangements. I'll have to call my supervisor, get special authorization, but I'll make it work. However, we need to move fast. If Marcus knows you're here, Isabella's phone buzzed on the bedside table, the vibration loud in the quiet room. She looked at the screen and her face went sheet white, all the blood draining away like someone had opened a valve. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered onto the linoleum floor. William leaned over despite the pain shooting through his ribs and picked it up. The message was from an unknown number, the area code blocked. Drop the charges by midnight tomorrow or Amelia disappears. You'll never find her body. This is your last warning. Choose wisely. Like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Detective Carson grabbed the phone from William's hand, already pulling out his own device to call it in. That's it. We're moving you now. I'll have 3 patrol cars escort us to Colorado Springs. We leave in 15 minutes. He was already dialing, his voice sharp and urgent as he barked orders to whoever answered. His phone rang before he could finish, cutting him off mid-sentence. He answered with a sharp Carson, then listened, his face darkening with each passing second like storm clouds gathering. When he hung up 30 seconds later, he looked like he'd aged 10 years, new lines carved deep into his forehead. That was New Mexico State Police, he said quietly, his cop voice cracking slightly. They found Henry's motorcycle abandoned on I-25 about 40 miles south of Albuquerque. Harley-Davidson with Denver Club insignia. There's blood on the seat, not a lot, but enough. His phone was smashed on the shoulder of the highway, deliberately destroyed. Pieces scattered across 50 feet of asphalt. Carson paused, meeting Isabella's horrified gaze. No sign of Henry himself. They're treating it as a possible abduction. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Amelia stirred in her lap, woken by her mother's sudden movement, confused by the distress radiating from the adults around her. "Mommy," the little girl asked in a small, scared voice. "Is Daddy okay? When is he coming home?" Isabella couldn't answer. She just pulled Amelia closer, her whole body shaking with silent sobs, her face buried in her daughter's hair. William's mind spun with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Marcus had people everywhere, in the club, on the highways between states, maybe even in the hospital right now wearing scrubs or security uniforms. They were sitting ducks in this room with its single door and window that didn't even open. He tried to swing his legs off the bed, ignoring the screaming pain in his wrapped ribs. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Right now? We can't stay here waiting for." A commotion erupted in the hallway outside, cutting him off. Raised voices. A nurse protesting loudly. Heavy footsteps approaching fast, multiple sets of boots on linoleum tile. Detective Carson's hand went instinctively to his holster as he moved toward the door, his body language shifting into combat readiness. Through the small window in the door, William saw hospital security, 2 guards in blue uniforms, trying to intercept someone. The detective yanked the door open, stepping into the hallway with his weapon drawn. "Sir, you need to stop right there. Hands where I can see them." But the footsteps didn't stop. They got closer, heavy and determined. William grabbed the force stand with his good hand, ready to use it as a weapon despite his injuries. Isabella stood, pushing Amelia behind her toward the bathroom, her eyes wild with terror, her body positioned between her daughter and whatever was coming through that door. Then Detective Carson backed into the room slowly, his gun still raised, but his finger off the trigger, and William saw who was behind him. A man in his mid-30s with dark hair and a close-cropped beard, wearing jeans and a leather jacket with Hell's Angels patches torn half off. His face was bruised and bloody, his left eye swollen nearly shut, his lips split open. His hands were raised in surrender, showing empty palms, but his knuckles were scraped raw like he'd been in a fight. Recognition flashed through William despite never having seen a photograph. It was Henry. "Don't shoot." Henry gasped, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. "It's me. I'm her husband. I'm Henry." Isabella rushed forward, but Carson held up a hand to stop her. "ID. Now," the detective ordered. Henry slowly reached for his wallet, moving carefully under the barrel of Carson's gun, and produced a driver's license. The detective examined it, compared the photo to the battered face, then finally lowered his weapon. Isabella crashed into Henry's arms, Amelia close behind, both of them crying as he wrapped them in a tight embrace despite the obvious pain in his body. But before anyone could ask questions, before the relief could even settle, Henry's eyes locked onto William with desperate intensity that made the teenager's blood run cold. "They're right behind me," Henry gasped, blood dripping from his mouth onto Isabella's shoulder. "Marcus knows you're here. He has people watching the hospital. I tried to lose them, tried to call and warn you, but my phone. I tried everything but." A nurse burst through the door, her face panicked, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Detective Carson, there's a situation developing in the main lobby. 3 men just came in demanding to know which room the family from the Colfax Avenue incident is in. They're getting aggressive with the front desk staff. Security is trying to handle it, but they're refusing to leave. They say they're family, but they're not on any approved visitor list." And William moved to the window on instinct and looked down at the hospital's main entrance 4 floors below. His blood turned to ice, freezing in his veins. 3 black motorcycles were parked in the emergency lane where ambulances should be, their chrome gleaming under the sodium lights. And walking through the automatic glass doors with predatory confidence, flanked by 2 men William recognized from the attack, the one with the injured knee and the one he'd hit with the vase, was Marcus. He was tall, built like a linebacker, with a shaved head and a goatee. Even from 4 floors up, William could see the cold determination in the way he moved, scanning the lobby, pointing toward the elevators. And they were heading straight up. Stairs. "Now," Detective Carson barked, holstering his weapon and grabbing his radio. "All units, code silver, 4th floor. 3 armed suspects entering main lobby. Lock down elevators immediately." William ripped the 4 from his arm, ignoring the sting and the droplet of blood that welled up. Henry scooped Amelia into his arms despite the obvious pain in his ribs, while Isabella grabbed the small plastic bag containing William's blood-soaked clothes from earlier. They burst into the hallway just as the elevator chime dinged at the far end of the corridor. "Service stairs, left side." A young nurse whispered urgently, pointing toward a door marked "Staff Only" in faded red letters. "Goes straight to the loading dock." They ran. Henry limped, his left leg dragging slightly. Whatever had happened on that highway had left him injured worse than he was letting on. William's wrapped ribs screamed with every step, but fear was a powerful anesthetic. Behind them, voices echoed from the elevator bay. Marcus's voice, deep and commanding. "4th floor. Room 447. Let's go." The stairwell was concrete and cold, their footsteps echoing like gunshots. Amelia whimpered against Henry's shoulder, and Isabella pressed her hand gently over her daughter's mouth. "Show, baby. We're playing hide and seek. Stay quiet for mommy." Detective Carson led them down 4 flights, his radio crackling with updates. "Suspects on 4th floor, security engaging. They're armed, officers responding." They burst through the loading dock exit into the freezing November air. A hospital laundry truck idled nearby, its driver smoking a cigarette and scrolling through his phone. Carson flashed his badge. "Police emergency. I need your vehicle." The driver took one look at the battered family and the detective's drawn weapon and tossed over his keys without argument. "It's all yours, man." They piled into the truck, Henry and Isabella in the back among bags of soiled linens, William in the passenger seat, Amelia on her mother's lap. Carson gunned the engine and they lurched forward, tires squealing on wet pavement as they rounded the corner onto Spear Boulevard. Through the side mirror, William saw Marcus burst through the loading dock door, his face twisted with rage. He pointed at the departing truck, shouting orders to his men. One of them ran toward the parked motorcycles. "They're following us," William said, his voice tight. Carson's jaw clenched. He grabbed his radio. "This is Detective Carson, badge 2847. I need immediate assistance. U.S. Marshal contact for witness protection. Federal case, urgent threat level." The response came back in less than 30 seconds. "Patching you through to Marshal Torres now." A new voice crackled over the radio, calm and professional. "This is U.S. Marshal Agent Victor Torres." "Detective, What's your situation? 3 hostile subjects pursuing federal witness and family. Currently mobile, heading south on Spear. Need immediate secure location. Copy that. I'm 20 minutes from your location. There's a safe house in Colorado Springs. Secure facility, off-grid. But we need to lose your tail first. Take I-25 south, exit at County Line Road. There's an abandoned warehouse district. I'll meet you there, and we'll transfer to my vehicle. Henry shifted in the back, his voice strained. Torres? Victor Torres? Short guy, scar on his left hand. That's him, the radio confirmed. Something flickered across Henry's battered face. Recognition, maybe concern, but before he could speak, headlights flooded the truck's cabin. A motorcycle pulled alongside them, the rider's face hidden behind a dark helmet. He reached into his jacket. Gun, William shouted. Carson swerved hard right, clipping a parked car. The motorcycle wobbled, but recovered. The rider pulled out what looked like a phone, not a weapon, and took a photo before dropping back and disappearing into traffic. They're tracking us, Isabella said, her voice hollow. They just photographed the vehicle. Carson made 3 rapid turns through residential neighborhoods, checking mirrors constantly. No headlights followed. After 15 minutes of evasive driving, he pulled into the warehouse district Torres had mentioned, a graveyard of industrial buildings with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. A black SUV with government plates sat waiting, engine running. Marshal Torres stepped out. Exactly as Henry had described, maybe 5'7", with a distinctive scar across his left hand. He wore tactical gear and carried himself with military precision. Let's move. Transfer now, Torres ordered, opening the SUV's doors. They climbed out of the laundry truck, Amelia still clutching Henry's neck. As they approached the SUV, Torres's eyes landed on William. The kid's not part of the protected party, he said flatly. He'll need to. He comes with us, Isabella interrupted, her voice steel. He saved our lives. If we're in danger, so is he. Torres's expression hardened. Ma'am, I have protocols. The safe house is authorized for witness and immediate family only. The kid complicates. The kid has a name, Henry said quietly, limping forward. His voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. It's William, and my wife's right. He's with us, or we're not going anywhere. Torres and Henry locked eyes for a long moment. William noticed Henry's hand drift subtly toward his belt, where a knife handle protruded. Old instincts. Torres noticed too and raised his hand slightly. Fine, Torres said finally. But this goes in my report. Let's go before they triangulate our position. The SUV's interior smelled like leather and gun oil. Torres drove fast but smooth, taking back roads that wound through darkness. Amelia finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., exhausted from terror. Isabella held her daughter with one arm and kept her other hand on William's shoulder, like she was afraid he might disappear. Henry sat in the front passenger seat, and William noticed him studying Torres with subtle intensity. There was history there, something unspoken. Didn't expect to see you on this case, Torres, Henry said quietly. Federal marshals go where we're assigned, Torres replied, eyes on the road. Your wife's testimony is high priority. How'd you know we were at Denver General? We didn't call marshals until Carson radioed tonight. Torres's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Been monitoring police frequencies since the trial got scheduled. Standard procedure for witness protection cases. It was a reasonable answer. But something about Torres's tone made William's instincts prickle. They arrived at the Colorado Springs safe house just before dawn. It was a modest ranch-style home in a quiet suburb, identical to every other house on the street. Deliberately forgettable. Torres did a security sweep while they waited in the vehicle, then ushered them inside. The house was clean but impersonal. Generic furniture, bare walls, no family photos. There were 3 bedrooms, a stocked kitchen, and reinforced doors with multiple deadbolts. Torres showed them the panic room hidden behind a bookshelf in the master bedroom. You're secure here, he said. I'll be in the attached garage monitoring surveillance. Don't leave the house for any reason. Trial's in 9 days. After you testify, you can relocate permanently if needed. Subscribe and like now. This family's nightmare is far from over. Isabella put Amelia to bed in the smallest bedroom. Henry collapsed onto the couch, finally allowing himself to show pain. His shirt was stiff with dried blood. William helped him remove the jacket, revealing bruises that covered his torso like a violent painting. "What happened on the highway?" William asked quietly. "Marcus's guys ambushed me at a rest stop outside Albuquerque," Henry said, wincing as Isabella brought ice packs. "3 of them. Beat me pretty bad, took my phone, threw me in a van. I managed to break free when they stopped for gas. Stole a truck from the gas station and drove straight here. How'd they know where you'd be?" Isabella asked. Henry's expression darkened. "Only 5 people knew I was at that meeting. All club members I thought I could trust." The implication hung in the air like smoke. The betrayal went deeper than Marcus. William volunteered to take the couch, insisting Henry and Isabella take the second bedroom. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind spun with questions. Around 2:45 a.m., he heard something, a quiet electronic beep from the garage where Torres was supposedly monitoring surveillance. William crept to the door and pressed his ear against it. Torres was on the phone, his voice low but audible. "Yeah, I've got them secured. Colorado Springs, the Maple Street location. No, the detective left an hour ago. Just the family and the kid. Okay, I'll confirm coordinates in the morning." William's blood ran cold. Who was Torres confirming coordinates with? The Marshal's service? Or someone else? He retreated silently to the couch, his mind racing. He must have dozed off eventually because when his eyes snapped open, gray dawn light filtered through the curtains. The house was silent. Too silent. William sat up and looked toward the garage door. It was open. Torres's gear was gone. The surveillance monitors were dark, powered off. He moved to the window and looked outside. Torres's SUV was gone, and in its place, parked across the street with engines idling, sat 2 black vehicles. As William watched, the driver's door of the first vehicle opened, and Marcus stepped out into the morning light, a gun visible in his waistband. He looked directly at the safe house, directly at William through the window, and smiled. William didn't waste time questioning what he saw. He'd survived 3 years on the streets by trusting his instincts, and every instinct in his 14-year-old body screamed danger. Marcus stood across the street in the pale dawn light, framed by 2 black SUVs like an executioner posing for a portrait. The way he smiled, predatory, patient, victorious, told William everything he needed to know. Torres had betrayed them. They were alone, and they had maybe 90 seconds before Marcus's crew breached the house. William sprinted to the master bedroom, his bare feet silent on the carpet, and shook Henry awake with enough force to rattle the bed frame. "They're here. Marcus is outside. Torres sold us out." Henry's eyes snapped open, years of military training and biker violence turning him from asleep to combat-ready in a single heartbeat. He rolled out of bed despite his injuries, grabbed his jeans from the floor, and shook Isabella awake while pulling them on with one hand. "Bella, wake up. We have to move. Now." Isabella jerked awake, disoriented for a second before the fear in their faces registered. She was up and moving before Henry finished explaining, maternal instinct overriding exhaustion. William ran to the smallest bedroom where Amelia slept curled under a thin blanket, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spilled sunlight. He hated to wake her, hated the terror that would bloom in her eyes when she realized they were running again. "Amelia," he whispered, gently touching her shoulder. "Hey, kiddo, wake up." The little girl stirred, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. When she focused on William's face, bandaged, scared, urgent, her bottom lip trembled. "Another game of hide and seek?" she asked in a small, brave voice that broke William's heart into pieces. "Yeah, sweetheart," Henry said, appearing in the doorway. He forced calmness into his voice that his body language contradicted. "But this time we have to be really, really quiet. Like mice. Can you be a quiet little mouse for Daddy?" Amelia nodded, wrapping her arms around William's neck as he picked her up. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and trust. They moved to the living room window, staying low, and watched Marcus confer with his men. 4 of them now, all armed with weapons that weren't trying to be concealed. They were planning their approach, taking positions around the house with the methodical efficiency of a military operation. Marcus pointed to the back door, gestured to the side windows, positioned his men like chess pieces. Back door, Isabella whispered, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Henry shook his head, his jaw clenched. They'll have it covered. Standard breach tactics. Front and back simultaneously, sides covered to prevent escape. We're boxed in. William's mind raced, pulling from memories of every tight spot he'd escaped on the streets, fleeing group homes, dodging cops, hiding from older teens who wanted his sleeping spot. Think like prey. What would a rat do in a trap? Then it hit him. The panic room. Torres showed us the panic room behind the bookshelf. That's a trap, Henry said immediately, his tactical mind already 3 steps ahead. First place they'll check once they breach. We'd be cornered like fish in a barrel. They could gas us out, starve us out, or just blow the door. Exactly, Williams said, his eyes bright with desperate inspiration. But what if we make them think we're in there while we actually go somewhere else? Give them something to focus on while we slip away. Henry's eyes narrowed, years of strategic thinking clicking into place, then understanding dawned across his battered face. The crawl space. These old ranch houses from the 50s all have them, built before modern foundations. Access should be through the hallway closet. They moved fast, adrenaline overriding pain and exhaustion. Henry pulled the bookshelf away from the wall with Isabella's help, his injured ribs protesting with every movement. The panic room entrance was a reinforced steel door hidden behind the furniture. He opened it, reached inside to turn on the light, making it obvious someone had been there, then closed it most of the way. Not locked, not quite shut. A breadcrumb trail for Marcus to follow. Meanwhile, William yanked open the hallway closet and started throwing out old coats, vacuum cleaners, boxes of Christmas decorations that had been left by previous occupants. There, in the back corner under a piece of plywood and old paint cans, he found it. A 2-foot square access panel to the crawl space. Henry grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen junk drawer and started removing screws as quietly as possible, but the old wood creaked with each turn. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold morning air. His hands shook slightly. From pain or fear, William couldn't tell. The sound of breaking glass shattered the morning silence like a gunshot. Marcus's men were coming in through the front window. No more time. Go, 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 Henry whispered urgently, yanking the access panel free. Isabella went first, sliding into the crawl space on her stomach with Amelia clutched to her chest. The opening was barely big enough for an adult. Amelia whimpered as the darkness swallowed them, but Isabella shushed her gently. William followed, squeezing through the tight opening, his bandaged ribs screaming in protest. The stitches in his forearm pulled against the wood, and he felt something warm, blood, probably, but there was no time to check. Henry came last, his broader shoulders barely fitting through the opening. He pulled himself through with his arms, dragging the paint cans back over the entrance just as heavy footsteps thundered through the living room directly above them. The plywood settled back into place, plunging them into near-total darkness. The crawl space was a nightmare. Dark, cold, and barely 3 feet high. It forced them to crawl on their bellies through damp earth and debris. Pink insulation hung from the floor joists above them like diseased flesh, and the smell of mold and rodent droppings filled William's nose. Cobwebs caught in his hair. Something small and many-legged scurried across his hand, and he bit down on his lip to keep from crying out. But they could hear everything through the thin flooring above them. Every footstep, every word, crystal clear. Check every room. Marcus's voice boomed, so close it felt like he was standing on William's back. They can't have gotten far. Torres confirmed they were here 30 minutes ago. They're injured, on foot, with a kid. Find them. Footsteps moved through the house methodically, the sound of trained searchers who knew their business. Doors slamming, furniture being overturned. The crash of dishes as someone swept the kitchen table clear. The sound of a mattress being flipped. They were destroying the safe house room by room. Then one of Marcus's men called out, triumph in his voice. Got something. Panic room's been accessed. Doors not locked properly. Fresh scuff marks on the floor where the bookshelf was moved. There we go, Marcus said, satisfaction dripping from his voice like poison. Stupid. Trap yourselves for us. Classic panic move. Tyler, get the breaching tool from the truck. And the acetylene torch. We'll crack it open like a sardine can and end this mess. Henry, Isabella, I know you can hear me. Make this easy and open up. Your kid doesn't need to see what happens when we cut through. The footsteps moved away toward the master bedroom. Henry gestured for them to move, pointing deeper into the crawl space toward the back of the house. They crawled in agonizing silence, inch by painful inch. The earth beneath them was cold and slightly damp, soaking through William's clothes. His bandaged arm left small smears of blood on the dirt. Amelia's breathing was rapid and shallow, hyperventilating from fear. But she held it together with the bravery only children could muster in impossible situations. Isabella kept one hand on her daughter's back, rubbing small circles, the other on William's ankle, maintaining contact so they wouldn't get separated in the darkness. The crawlspace led under the attached garage, and Henry had spotted a foundation vent that opened to the outside when Torres first showed them the house during the security walkthrough. If they could reach it, they could slip out while Marcus's crew was focused on breaching the panic room. Above them, something metallic crashed against the panic room door with the sound of thunder. Once, twice, Marcus cursing with creative profanity that would have made a sailor blush. They reached the foundation vent after what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes. Henry used the screwdriver to remove the screws holding the vent cover in place, working as fast as he dared. The first screw came free easily. The second stuck but yielded after a few extra turns. The third screw was rusted solid, corroded by years of moisture. Wouldn't budge no matter how hard Henry pushed. Like and subscribe. William's survival skills are the only thing keeping them alive. Henry gritted his teeth, put all his upper body strength into it, and the screwdriver slipped, clattering against the concrete foundation with a metallic ring that echoed through the crawlspace like a bell. The sounds above them stopped. Complete silence. Then, what was that? One of Marcus's men said. Crawlspace, another replied, his voice sharp with realization. They're under the damn house. Check it. Now, footsteps moved fast toward the hallway, toward the closet, toward the access panel they'd crawled through minutes earlier. Henry abandoned stealth and wrenched the vent cover free with brute force, bending the metal, breaking the last rusted screw rather than unscrewing it. The opening was barely big enough for Amelia, maybe 18 inches square. Isabella pushed her daughter through first, the little girl scraping her knees on the concrete edge. Then Isabella squeezed through, her shoulder catching and tearing her shirt. William followed, his bandaged arm scraping against the concrete, feeling the stitches pop. Henry came last, his broader shoulders barely fitting. He had to exhale completely, make himself as small as possible, and for a terrifying second William thought he was stuck. But Henry twisted sideways and pulled himself through with his arms, emerging into the backyard just as they heard the crawlspace access panel being ripped open inside. They were here, tracks in the dirt. Moving toward the back, a voice shouted from inside the crawlspace. They emerged in the backyard of the safe house's neighbor. A modest home with children's toys scattered across brown November grass, and an old Ford pickup truck parked in the driveway. No time to run. The street would be visible, exposed. Marcus would have men watching. Henry tried the truck's door, locked. But the bed cover, one of those soft tonneau covers, was loose on one side, not properly secured to the rail. In, he whispered urgently. Now. They climbed into the truck bed, trying not to rock the vehicle on its suspension. The bed smelled like motor oil and old fast food. Henry pulled the cover over them, sealing them in darkness just as Marcus's men burst into the backyard. Through a small gap where the cover didn't quite seal, William watched 2 armed bikers scan the area, weapons drawn. They were young, maybe mid-20s, both with the lean, dangerous look of men who'd done hard time. One had a teardrop tattoo under his left eye. Nothing out here. One called back toward the house. Maybe it was just an animal in the crawlspace. Rats or possums. Check the neighbors' yards anyway. Marcus ordered from inside, his voice carrying through the morning air. Every single one. Look in cars, sheds, doghouses. They're bleeding and exhausted. They can't have gotten far on foot. They held their breath. William's heart hammered so loud he was certain they could hear it. Seconds stretched into minutes. One of Marcus's men walked right past the truck, so close William could smell his cigarette smoke and see the Hell's Angels insignia tattooed on his neck, a winged death's head. The man paused right next to the truck bed, pulling out his phone, checking something on the screen. 20 seconds. 30. An eternity. Then he walked on, disappearing around the side of the house. After what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes, they heard Marcus's voice again, frustrated and barely containing rage. They slipped out somehow. Crafty bastards. Fan out. Check the whole neighborhood block by block. They're on foot, injured, with a kid. They can't move fast. Someone's seen them. Knock on doors. Flash money if you have to. Find them. Motorcycle engines roared to life, the thunder of Harley-Davidsons splitting the morning quiet. Vehicles departed. Silence descended. They waited another 15 minutes before Henry carefully lifted the truck bed cover an inch and scanned the area through the gap. Empty. He waited 5 more minutes, watching, listening. Nothing. Finally, he opened the cover fully and they climbed out, every muscle screaming in protest. Where do we go? Isabella asked, her voice shaking. She was trying to hold it together for Amelia, but William could see the cracks forming. We can't trust the police. Torres was federal. U.S. Marshal. If he's compromised, who else is? How deep does this go? William knew exactly where they needed to go. Back to the place he'd survived before Isabella found him. I know a place. South Denver, near Evans Avenue. Industrial area. Nobody goes there anymore. Nobody will look for us there. They walked for over an hour through residential neighborhoods, staying off main streets, cutting through backyards when possible. Henry limped badly now, his adrenaline fading and his injuries catching up with brutal honesty. His left eye was swollen nearly shut from the beating on the highway. Isabella's hands shook constantly. Amelia rode on Henry's shoulders despite his pain, too exhausted to walk. William led them to an area he knew too well, the industrial district south of Evans Avenue, where he'd spent 2 months sleeping before finding Isabella's porch. Abandoned warehouses, empty lots, graffiti-tagged buildings that had once housed manufacturing businesses now shipped overseas. The warehouse William chose was 4 stories of red brick with broken windows and a loading dock door that didn't quite close. Inside, it smelled like rust and abandonment. But it was structurally sound, mostly weathertight, and William had hidden emergency supplies here once. A sleeping bag, some canned food, bottled water, a first aid kit. Most of it was still there, untouched behind a loose brick in the corner where he'd hidden it. Isabella spread the sleeping bag for Amelia, who collapsed onto it immediately, unconscious before her head settled. Isabella sat beside her daughter, running her fingers through blonde hair, her expression haunted. Henry sat heavily against the wall, his face gray with pain and blood loss. He lifted his shirt, revealing bruises that had darkened to deep purple and black. William suspected broken ribs, maybe internal bleeding. We need information, Henry said, his voice strained but determined. We need to know what Marcus's endgame is. He's not just trying to kill us to stop the trial. This is bigger. He's been planning something beyond silencing witnesses. This feels orchestrated, strategic. William remembered passing a public library 3 blocks away when they'd walked through the area. There's a Denver Public Library branch nearby. They have computers with free internet. I can search for information. Take this, Henry said, pulling $20 from his wallet. Get food too. Anything cheap. We need calories. 20 minutes later, William sat at a library computer terminal in the nearly empty building, using the free guest access. His fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory from countless hours at library computers when he was homeless, looking for resources, searching for his lost brother in the foster system, reading anything to escape reality for a few hours. He searched news sites, social media, anything related to the Hells Angels and Denver. Then he found it. An article from the Denver Post dated 2 days ago, buried in the local news section. Regional Hells Angels rally scheduled for Saturday at Denver Convention Center. 500-plus bikers expected for Peace Summit. Saturday. Tomorrow. William kept reading, his blood running progressively colder with each sentence. The rally was a peace summit between chapters from 6 states, an attempt to heal the rift caused by Marcus's crimes and Henry's decision to testify. Henry was supposed to speak at the main assembly, to explain his decision to turn in the rogue members, to appeal for understanding and unity. 500 bikers in one place. Chapter presidents, sergeants at arms, veterans. The entire power structure of the regional Hells Angels gathered under one roof. William's hands started to shake as he searched for more details. Then he found something that made his heart stop completely. A cached forum post from an encrypted biker message board, discussing security concerns about the rally. Someone with the username m_Denver had posted just 12 hours ago. Don't worry about security arrangements. I've got it handled from the inside. After Saturday, the club will know exactly who the real traitor is. Justice will be served. The Brotherhood will be purified. Marcus. It had to be Marcus. He was planning something catastrophic at the rally. Something that would kill hundreds of people. And he would frame Henry for it. Make it look like Henry had orchestrated a massacre of his own brothers in revenge for being cast out. William printed the articles using the guest print account, hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the papers. He ran back to the warehouse, his injured ribs screaming, the 3 blocks feeling like 3 miles. He burst through the loading dock door, breathless. Marcus is going to attack the rally, he gasped between heaving breaths. Tomorrow. Saturday. 500 bikers. He's going to kill them and frame Henry. He posted about it online. He's got inside access to security. He's planning a... His words died in his throat. Henry, Isabella, and Amelia were standing in the center of the warehouse, hands raised above their heads. Surrounding them were 6 armed men in Hells Angels leather, but these weren't Marcus's crew. Different faces. Different patches. William recognized one from a photo that had been on Isabella's refrigerator at her apartment. Calvin, a tall black man with gray in his beard, one of Henry's oldest friends from the club. But Calvin's gun wasn't pointed at Henry. It was pointed directly at Isabella's chest. At Amelia, standing behind her mother. "Sorry, brother," Calvin said to Henry, his voice thick with emotion that sounded genuine. "Marcus's bounty on your family is $500,000. Cash. Untraceable. I got 3 kids of my own to feed. Wife's got cancer. Medical bills are drowning me. You understand how it is. It's just business." Henry's face was a mask of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. "Calvin, please. We've been brothers for 12 years. You were at my wedding. You held Amelia when she was baptized. Please." Calvin's finger moved to the trigger, and tears actually ran down his face even as he aimed. Had to be done, Henry. Club voted. Marcus called for a vote. 38 to 32. You're out. Brotherhood is over. Then, from the shadows behind Calvin, another voice spoke. Cold, triumphant, familiar in the worst way. "Actually, Calvin, there's been a slight change of plans." Marcus stepped into the light filtering through the broken windows, and he wasn't alone. He was dragging someone by the collar. Agent Torres, bloodied and zip-tied, a gun pressed to his temple. Torres's face was a mess of bruises, one eye swollen completely shut, blood crusting his nose and mouth. Marcus looked at Henry with a smile that held no warmth, only malicious satisfaction. "Surprised?" Torres here decided he loved money more than duty. "Sold you out for 50,000. But then he got cold feet, tried to warn the FBI. Can't have loose ends." He shoved Torres to the ground, keeping the gun trained on his head. Then Marcus turned to Calvin and the other 5 bikers. "New deal, gentlemen. You don't get paid for killing them. You get paid for walking away right now and forgetting you saw anything. 20,000 each. Cash in your hands within the hour. Or stay and become accessories to what I'm about to do and spend the rest of your lives in federal prison. Choose." Calvin hesitated for maybe 3 seconds, then lowered his gun. "We're out. No part of this, Marcus. This is on you." He and his crew backed out of the warehouse, disappearing into the afternoon shadows. Now it was just Marcus, two of his loyal crew members, Torres on the ground, and Henry's family. Marcus looked at Henry with something that might have been genuine sadness buried under layers of rage and betrayal. Here's how this works, brother. You've got exactly 60 seconds to decide. Come with me to the rally tomorrow. Stand on that stage. Help me finish what we started. And your family lives. They disappear. New identities. I never touch them again. He pressed the gun harder against Torres's head. Torres sobbed, begging wordlessly. Refuse. Marcus continued, his voice dropping to something colder than ice. And everyone you love dies. Starting with this rat, then your pretty wife, then that innocent little girl who calls me Uncle Marcus, then the homeless kid who thinks he's a fucking hero. Marcus pulled out his phone with his free hand and set a timer. The display glowed in the warehouse dimness. 60 seconds, Henry. Choose wisely. Your family's lives, or 500 brothers die tomorrow at the convention center when the bombs I've planted detonate. Clock's ticking. The timer started counting down. 59, 58, 57. Henry looked at Isabella, at Amelia, at William, at the gun pressed to Torres's head, at Marcus's face, hard as stone. 55, 54, 53. The timer ticked down. 52, 51, 50. Henry's hands trembled. 49 seconds to choose between condemning 500 men to death or watching his family executed in front of him. There was no right answer. No heroic solution. Just impossible choices and blood. Stop, William said quietly. Everyone turned to look at the 14-year-old homeless kid standing in the corner with printed papers clutched in his bleeding hand. I said stop. William's voice cracked, but carried authority born from desperation. Marcus, you're not going to kill them. And Henry's not going to help you. Because if either of those things happen, these forum posts I just printed, where you detailed your entire plan under the username M_Denver, go straight to the FBI, the ATF, and every news station in Colorado. Marcus's face darkened. You're bluffing, kid. Am I? William held up the papers. You posted 12 hours ago about having inside security access. You mentioned purifying the Brotherhood and justice being served after Saturday. That's premeditation, conspiracy, domestic terrorism. Even if you kill us all right here, I sent copies to 3 different email addresses on delayed send. If I don't cancel them in. He glanced at an imaginary watch. 6 hours, they auto-send. You kill us, you hang yourself. It was a complete lie. William had barely figured out how to print at the library, let alone set up delayed emails. But his voice didn't waver, and his eyes held Marcus's without flinching. Marcus's jaw clenched. The gun trembled slightly against Torres's head. You're a street kid. You don't know how to. I lived in libraries for 2 years, William interrupted. I know computers better than I know people. Try me. The warehouse fell silent except for the timer. 38, 37, 36. Henry spoke, his voice steady despite everything. Marcus, brother, this isn't who you are. The man I knew for 15 years wouldn't massacre innocent people. The man who taught me to ride, who was there when Amelia was born, he's still in there. This path ends with you in a supermax prison or dead. There's still time to stop this. Those kids in Boulder had time too, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. But we didn't give it to them. I see their faces every night, Henry. Every single night. The FBI is going to put me away for life anyway. At least this way, I take the traitors with me. There's no honor in more death, Isabella said softly, stepping forward despite the guns pointed at her. Those children's parents would tell you the same thing if they could. This doesn't fix what happened. It just creates more families with empty chairs at dinner. More kids without fathers. More wives without husbands. 25, 24, 23. Marcus's hand shook violently now. For a moment, William saw something flicker across his face. Doubt, guilt, exhaustion. The mask was cracking. Marcus. Amelia's small voice cut through the tension. The 8-year-old stepped out from behind her mother, her eyes wide but fearless. You gave me a teddy bear for my birthday. You said you'd always protect me. You promised. Marcus's face crumpled. The gun dropped slightly. I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry. Then stop. William said, stepping forward again. Because I'm not watching another family die. Isabella gave me food when I was starving. She saw me when I was invisible. Amelia shared her cookies with me. Henry's trying to do the right thing in a world that punishes people for having a conscience. If you want to kill them, you go through me first. Like and subscribe. This homeless kid is about to save everyone. William stood 3 feet from Marcus now, a 14-year-old kid with bandaged arms and broken ribs facing down a man twice his size holding a loaded gun. You were a kid once, William said quietly. Someone probably helped you, gave you a chance, saw something in you worth saving. Don't become the person who takes that away from others. You're better than this. I know you are. Henry knows it. Even after everything, he still calls you brother. Marcus's eyes met Henry's across the warehouse. Years of brotherhood, of shared struggles and victories, of loyalty that had been shattered but not completely destroyed. I'm tired, Henry, Marcus whispered. I'm so damn tired of running, of being angry, of seeing those kids' faces. Then stop running, Henry said. Help us stop this. Save those 500 men. You'll still go to prison, probably for a long time. But you'll go knowing you prevented a massacre. That counts for something. It has to count for something. The timer hit 0. It buzzed in Marcus's hand. For 10 seconds that felt like 10 years, nobody moved. Then Marcus lowered the gun completely and sank to his knees. The weapon clattered to the concrete floor. Convention Center, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Main Assembly Hall. For devices wired to the electrical system under the stage. Remote detonator. I was going to trigger them during Henry's speech. God forgive me. God forgive me. Henry grabbed Marcus's phone and dialed 911, providing information to the dispatcher with military precision. Location, number of devices, type of explosives, exact placement. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Marcus's 2 crew members exchanged glances, then carefully set down their weapons and raised their hands. They were done fighting too. Torres, still zip-tied on the floor, wept with relief. The FBI bomb squad cleared the Denver Convention Center 4 hours later, finding exactly what Marcus described. For sophisticated devices, enough explosives to collapse the main assembly hall and kill everyone inside. The squad commander called it the closest we've come to a domestic terrorist attack in Colorado history. The rally was postponed, but eventually held 2 weeks later with 612 bikers in attendance, the largest turnout in the Denver chapter's history. Henry spoke about redemption, about choosing conscience over convenience, about how true brotherhood meant holding each other accountable. He received a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Marcus pleaded guilty to conspiracy and attempted mass murder, but the federal prosecutor, acknowledging his cooperation and the 500-plus lives saved, recommended a reduced sentence. The judge sentenced him to 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. Your actions in that warehouse, the judge said during sentencing, prove there's still humanity in you worth saving. The 4 men responsible for the Boulder murders received life without parole. Torres lost his badge but avoided prison in exchange for testimony about corruption in the Marshals Service. Calvin and the other bikers who'd confronted them in the warehouse were questioned but ultimately not charged. They'd walked away before any violence occurred. Isabella testified at all the trials with courage that made national news. The prosecution called her the hero who'd risked everything for justice. Henry was pardoned by the governor for his role in stopping the bombing and granted immunity from any club-related charges. The Denver Hells Angels chapter formally expelled the rogue faction and voted Henry as their new president. He accepted on the condition that the club refocus on charity work and community service. 3 months later, William stood in family court in a suit Isabella had bought him, his first suit ever. Judge Patricia Martinez reviewed the adoption papers with a warm smile. William, she said, do you understand that this adoption makes Henry and Isabella your legal parents? That Amelia becomes your legal sister? That you'll have all the rights and responsibilities of their biological child? William nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I hereby grant this adoption. Congratulations to the entire family. Isabella cried. Henry's hand rested on William's shoulder, steady and proud. Amelia bounced on her toes and whispered loudly, "Now you're really my brother. Forever." They moved to a house in suburban Littleton with a fenced yard, 3 bedrooms, and a golden retriever puppy, Amelia, named Justice. William enrolled in Littleton High School as a freshman. Despite missing 3 years of formal education, he threw himself into learning with fierce determination. He made the soccer team, joined the computer club, and finished his first semester with straight B's and 1 A in English. His teacher said his essay about survival and family was the most powerful thing she'd read in 20 years of teaching. Henry transformed the Denver chapter. They started a youth mentorship program for at-risk kids. They organized charity rides that raised money for domestic violence shelters. They partnered with Denver Public Schools to provide scholarships for students aging out of foster care. The local news did a feature story calling them the Hells Angels you've never heard about. Isabella went back to school herself, taking nursing classes at Community College of Denver. She wanted to help people, she said. After everything they'd been through, she understood how fragile life was and how much healing mattered. On a warm Saturday evening in August, 8 months after everything, they gathered in their backyard for a barbecue. Henry manned the grill, flipping burgers with exaggerated chef's flair that made Amelia giggle. Isabella brought out potato salad and lemonade. William threw a tennis ball for Justice, who bounded after it with puppy enthusiasm. Detective Carson stopped by with his family, his wife, and 2 teenage daughters. He'd stayed in touch, checking on them regularly, becoming something like an uncle to William. Torres sent a letter from Arizona, where he'd started working as a security consultant. He apologized again, explained he was in therapy, said he thought about them often. Even Marcus wrote from federal prison. The letter was brief but sincere. "Thank you for saving me from myself. I'm taking classes, working with the chaplain, trying to become someone those Boulder kids' parents might someday forgive. Tell William he's the bravest person I've ever met. Tell him I'm trying to be brave too." As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in oranges and purples, William sat on the back porch steps watching his family. Henry laughed at something Carson said. Isabella hugged her daughters close. Amelia taught Carson's girls a complicated clapping game. Justice sprawled across William's feet, exhausted and content. William felt something he'd never felt before, something he didn't have words for until Isabella sat down beside him and put her arm around his shoulders. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked. William nodded, smiling. "Yeah, I'm home." Isabella kissed the top of his head. "Yes, you are. Forever." The evening air smelled like charcoal and cut grass. Laughter echoed across the yard. Inside the house, William's soccer trophy sat on the mantel next to Amelia's school art project and a family photo taken at the adoption hearing. For people who'd been strangers less than a year ago, now bound together by something stronger than blood, they'd all been broken in different ways. They'd all faced darkness that should have destroyed them, but they'd survived. Together. And that made all the difference.